The asphalt was a black tongue licking under the tires, swallowed by a fog so thick it felt like driving through damp wool. The dashboard glow was the only thing keeping the world real. "Your turn," Mark said. I leaned into the headrest, my hands fused to the steering wheel at 10 and 2. My knuckles were white, bone-tight. Mark sat in the periphery of my vision, a shadow draped in his favorite charcoal blazer. "I'm too tired for games, Mark," I whispered. My voice felt thin, like it might snap if I spoke any louder. "Just one more round," he said. His voice had a strange, resonant quality, like he was speaking into a metal bucket. "To keep you awake. I'll go. 1. I hate the way you cook eggs. 2. I've never told you where I hid the spare key to the shed. 3. Our wedding night at the Cliffside Inn was the most peaceful I've ever felt." I smiled instinctively, but the expression died halfway up my face. A cold, oily sensation slid down my spine. "The wedding night?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Yeah," he chuckled. The sound didn't quite reach his chest, it stayed in his throat, a dry, rattling vibration. "Remember? The rain hitting the cedar shingles. You wore that white silk slip, and we drank that cheap champagne until the sun came up over the coast. It was perfect, Sarah. I've never felt more alive than in that moment with my wife. I felt the air leave the car. The heater, which had been blowing clean, new car air, suddenly belched a scent that made my gorge rise, the heavy, metallic tang of old copper piping mixed with the musky, rotting stench of a wet dog. I stared straight ahead at the white lines on the road. I couldn't look left. If I looked left, I would have to acknowledge the impossibility. Mark had died in a pile-up on I-95 3 years ago. I had buried him. I had cried until my tear ducts felt like sandpaper. But more than that, Mark was my brother. We weren't married. I had never been a wife. I had never owned a white silk slip. The thing in the passenger seat had been in my house for a week. It had sat at my dinner table. It had slept in the guest room. It had learned the shape of my grief and poured itself into the mold of a man who didn't exist. "Sarah?" he asked. I caught a glimpse of his hand resting on his knee. The fingernails weren't on top of his fingers, they were embedded into the pads of his fingertips, jagged and yellowed. The seatbelt was pulled so tight it was burying itself an inch deep into the soft flesh of his neck, but there was no blood. No bruising. Just a deep, plastic-looking indentation. "That's a good one," I choked out, forcing my foot to stay steady on the gas. 70 miles per hour. If I jumped, I died. If I screamed, it won't be a game anymore. The wedding night. That's the lie, right? "No," he said, and I could hear the wet thud of his eyelids closing, not down, but cinching toward the middle from the sides. That was the truth. The eggs are the lie. I actually love them. Up ahead, a neon sign flickered through the fog. A Shell station. A haven of fluorescent hums and linoleum. "I need gas," I said, my voice cracking. "We have half a tank," the thing said. It turned its head toward me. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the blazer shift. The buttons weren't through the holes, they were pushed directly into the gray, translucent skin of its chest, held there by dried crusts of something dark. "I need coffee," I snapped, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would crack a rib. "I'm stopping." I swerved into the station, the tires screeching against the pavement. I slammed the car into park and fumbled for the door handle, my skin crawling with the need to be under the harsh, unforgiving light of the gas station canopy. I threw the door open and stumbled out, gasping for the cold, sulfur-scented night air. I leaned against the pump, waiting for the thing to step out, waiting for it to unfold its impossible limbs and end the charade. I looked back through the driver's side window. The passenger seat was empty. A wave of relief started to wash over me, until I looked at my own reflection in the dark tinted glass of the rear door. I wasn't looking at myself. The woman in the reflection was wearing my jacket, but her ears were tucked too low, nearly reaching her jawline. Her mouth was beginning to stretch into a wide, unblinking grin that felt less like a smile and more like a tear in the world. Then, the reflection spoke, its lips not moving in sync with the sound. "My turn," my own voice whispered from the empty car. 1. I'm Sarah. 2. I'm the thing that killed her. 3. I'm almost finished practicing. Second story. The blue light of the spreadsheet felt like a cold weight on my eyes. It was 1:14 a.m. In the corner of my second monitor, the baby monitor feed glowed in a grainy, infrared green. My 2-year-old, Toby, was a motionless lump under his dinosaur duvet. Then, the nursery door on the screen swung open. A man walked in. He was wearing the same flannel shirt I'd tossed in the hamper that morning. He sat in the rocking chair, his movements jerky, like a film missing every third frame. I sat frozen, my heart doing a slow, heavy roll in my chest. I looked down at my own hands, then back at the screen. The Leo on the monitor leaned over the crib and began to sing. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star." The voice was mine, but it was wrong. It sounded like a digital recording being stretched. The little skipped and repeated like a scratched CD. Every time the thing hit a high note, its jaw distended, dropping far past the point of a human hinge until its chin brushed its collarbone. In the night vision feed, its eyes didn't look human. They caught the infrared light and bounced it back with a flat, feline luminescence. I bolted toward the office door, but my hand died on the knob. If I went up there, I was walking into the teeth of something that wore my own skin. But if I stayed... Toby. The Leo on the screen stopped singing. It turned its head 180 degrees, a wet, crunching sound echoed through the tiny speaker, and looked directly into the camera lens. It grinned. The teeth were too numerous, crowded into its mouth like a graveyard. I didn't think anymore. I grabbed a heavy glass paperweight from my desk and sprinted. My lungs burned as I took the stairs two at a time, the silence of the house screaming in my ears. I burst into the nursery, slamming the door against the wall. "Toby!" I roared. The rocking chair was empty. The room was freezing, smelling of ozone and wet earth. I lunged for the crib, scooping up the bundle under the duvet. "I've got you, I've got you." The bundle was light. Too light. I pulled back the blanket. It wasn't Toby. It was a mass of my own discarded laundry from the hamper, twisted and coiled into the rough shape of a child. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from my wife, Sarah. She wasn't supposed to be home until tomorrow. "Sarah, 1:18 a.m., Leo. Why are you upstairs? I just pulled into the driveway and I can see you in the nursery window. Stop it. You're scaring me. Why are you smiling like that?" I looked at the window. Beyond the glass, down in the driveway, Sarah was standing by the car, her face pale in the moonlight, her phone pressed to her chest. She was staring straight up at me. I looked down at my hands. They were longer than they had been a minute ago. My fingernails felt sharp, pressing into the pads of my fingers from the inside out. I tried to scream her name, to tell her to run, but all that came out of my throat was a distorted, looping clip of a lullaby. Twinkle, twinkle, twinkle. The door behind me, the one I had just burst through, began to creak shut. I wasn't the one looking out the window. But something was. Third story. The fluorescent lights of the subway car hummed with a sickly, rhythmic buzz that matched the headache throbbing behind Elena's eyes. It was 2:14 a.m. The train screeched and tilted as it banked into a deep tunnel, the centrifugal force pulling Elena to the side. She grabbed the metal pole, her body swaying naturally with the momentum. But the man sitting directly across from her didn't move. He was dressed in a crisp navy suit, a leather briefcase perched on his knees. As the train jolted violently, his body remained terrifyingly plumb, as if he were bolted to the chassis of the earth itself. No tilt of the head, no tensing of the core. He sat like a statue carved from something denser than bone. Elena felt a prickle of heat crawl up her neck. She shifted in her seat, crossing her left leg over her right. 2 seconds later, the man crossed his left leg. It wasn't a fluid motion, his knees seemed to pivot on a dry ball and socket, his foot snapping into place with a sound like a heavy book dropping on carpet. She looked at his reflection in the dark tunnel glass. In the mirror world, he looked perfect. But in the dim, direct light of the car, she could see the bulges. Under the fine wool of his sleeve, something moved, a slow, undulating ripple that looked like a coiled snake shifting beneath the skin. He realized she was staring. To compensate, the man performed a human gesture. He jerked his arm up to check the time. But there was no watch. He simply stared at his bare, pale wrist with intense, unblinking focus. He held the pose for a full minute, his eyes tracking invisible second hands that weren't there. Then, he laughed. It was a sharp, barking sound that didn't start in the lungs. It was a perfect imitation of a businessman's chuckle, but it came out of his mouth before his face even changed expression. After the sound died away, his lips slowly peeled back into a wide, rehearsed grin. "Late night," he said. The voice was a composite, 3 different pitches vibrating at once. The train began to slow, the brakes screaming against the tracks. The noise was deafening, yet Elena realized she couldn't hear the man breathing. Even in the silence between the brake screeches, there was no rise and fall of his chest, no pulse fluttering in his neck. Just the smell of the car, ozone, floor wax, and a sudden, sharp whiff of stagnant pond water. The doors hissed open at 42nd Street. Elena bolted. She didn't look back. She sprinted up the concrete stairs, her boots echoing like gunfire. She burst onto the mezzanine, desperate for the sight of another human, any real human. The station was surprisingly packed for 2:30 a.m. Dozens of commuters stood on the platform, their backs to her. Relief flooded her chest, hot and dizzying. She saw a transit officer standing near the turnstiles, his familiar neon vest a beacon of safety. "Officer! Please," she gasped, grabbing his shoulder. "There's someone on the train, he's..." The officer turned around. He didn't speak. He didn't ask what was wrong. Instead, he raised his arm in a jerky, mechanical motion to check his watch. His wrist was bare. Elena's heart stopped. She looked around the mezzanine. Every single person in the crowd, the woman in the trench coat, the teenager with headphones, the janitor, had stopped moving. In perfect, terrifying synchronization, they all raised their bare wrists to their eyes. The station fell into an absolute, suffocating silence. No one coughed. No one shuffled. Then, 30 mouths opened at once, and a chorus of 30 different voices, all overlapping in a distorted harmony, asked the exact same question. "Do you have the time?" Fourth story. The fluorescent hum of ICU Room 4 was the only thing filling the silence of the 3 a.m. shift. Marcus adjusted the 4 drip for Mr. Henderson, a man kept alive by the rhythmic hiss-click of a ventilator. "Vitals are stabilizing," a voice said from the shadows near the heart monitor. Marcus didn't turn. He knew that voice, the calm, gravelly baritone of Dr. Eris. They'd spent a decade together in the trenches of trauma surgery. "Good to hear, document. I was worried about that arrhythmia." Dr. Eris stepped into the sterile white light. He was fully scrubbed in, his surgical mask tied tight. But as he leaned over Mr. Henderson, Marcus noticed something odd. Eris didn't reach for the stethoscope hanging around his neck. Instead, He pressed his ear directly against the patient's bare chest. The room went silent, except for a low, wet vibration. It sounded like a cat purring, but metallic. Marcus realized with a jolt of ice in his chest that the sound wasn't coming from the patient. It was coming from Eris's own throat, a rhythmic thump-thump he was projecting to mask the fact that Mr. Henderson's heart had actually stopped beating minutes ago. The mitral valve is functioning within optimal parameters, Eris said, lifting his head. His eyes were wide and static, the pupils not reacting to the bright overhead lights. "Doctor," Marcus whispered, his hand trembling as he reached for the chart. "Your stethoscope. Why aren't you using it?" "The acoustic resonance of direct contact is superior for detecting leaks," Eris replied. As he spoke, the blue paper of his surgical mask dampened. Something sharp and black poked at the inside of the fabric, not a tongue, but something pointed and hard, like a talon, testing the tension of the mask. "You're acting strange, David," Marcus said, stepping back toward the wall. "I am functioning at 100% efficiency, Marcus," the thing said. Its voice was a perfect replica of Eris, but the empathy was gone, replaced by a chilling, hollow politeness. "The patient's blood pH is dropping. I can taste the acidity in the air. It's exquisite." A purple, ribbon-like tongue flicked out from the side of the mask, lashing the air with a frantic, sensory hunger before vanishing back into the mouth. Marcus looked at the monitors. They were all flatlining, but the speakers were still emitting the sounds of a healthy heartbeat. The creature was hacking the audio, or perhaps just throwing its voice. He couldn't leave. He couldn't leave Mr. Henderson or the 5 other patients on this wing to be harvested. His hand found the red, code blue, button on the wall. He slammed it. "Help! I need a crash team in room 4. Now!" Marcus screamed. Heavy footsteps thundered down the hallway. The double doors swung open with a bang. Marcus exhaled, expecting to see the night staff. 6 people in white lab coats rushed in. Every single one of them had the exact same face. 6 Dr. Arises stood in a semicircle around Marcus. They didn't have medical bags. They didn't look at the patient. "Nurse Marcus," the one in the lead said, his voice overlapping with the others in a sickening resonance. "We noticed a synchronization error in your department. You are seeing things that do not exist." They all stepped forward in unison, their surgical masks twitching as 12 pointed shapes poked at the fabric from the inside. "Don't worry," the chorus of doctors said, their voices dropping into that low, vibrating hum. "We're going to recalibrate your perspective. This won't hurt nearly as much as the real Eris did." 5th story. The abyss doesn't just hold darkness, it holds a silence so heavy it feels like it's trying to swallow the base whole. I sat in the comms hub, the green glow of the monitors reflecting off my sweat-slicked forehead. "Elias, can you hear me? It's so quiet out here," Sarah's voice crackled through my headset. I looked at the airlock monitor. Sarah was sitting on the bench, her heavy diving helmet resting on her knees. She looked exhausted, her hair matted to her forehead. "I hear you, Sarah. Depressurization is at 60%. Just hang on." "The water, Elias," the voice continued, smooth and melodic. It wasn't cold. It felt like velvet. Like a pulse. "I think I want to go back in." I frowned, leaning toward the screen. "Sarah, you're delirious. You were out there for 3 hours fixing the hull. The temp is near freezing." My hand brushed against the console, knocking my headset jack loose. The cord swung freely, disconnected from the board. "It's so warm, Elias. Don't you want to feel it?" The voice didn't stop. It wasn't coming from the speakers. It was vibrating through the floorboards, a low, resonant thrum like a cello bow being dragged across my own ribcage. On the monitor, Sarah's mouth was clamped tight, her lips a thin, bloodless line. Her chest didn't rise or fall with breath, but her throat was convulsing rhythmically, as if something inside her was trying to hum its way out. Cold dread, sharper than the Arctic currents, flooded my veins. I looked at the secondary monitor, the external feed of the deep trench floodlights. In the far corner of the frame, a white shape drifted. I zoomed in. It was a diving suit. Sarah's diving suit. The lifeline had been sheared off, the jagged metal ends gleaming in the dark. Inside the faceplate, I saw a pale, bloated face, the real Sarah, staring into the void, her lungs long since collapsed by the 3 miles of water above us. I looked back at the Sarah in the airlock. It was looking directly into the camera now. Her skin looked tight, stretched to the point of translucency, and a thick, briny fluid was weeping from her pores, pooling on the floor like concentrated salt water. "Elias," the voice thrummed through the walls. "The hull is failing. I can hear the rivets popping. You need to open the exterior hatch. We have to swim for the surface. It's the only way to be safe." I reached for the emergency lever, my brain screaming that the base was collapsing. I could hear the phantom groan of twisting metal. My hand hovered over the release that would blow the station wide open. Then, I looked at the real Sarah on the external monitor one last time. The drifting body was close to the glass now, caught in an eddy. Her hand was raised, pressed against the outside of the reinforced window. She wasn't just drifting. With her final, frozen strength, she was pointing a finger at her own neck. I squinted. Around her throat, a series of crude, jagged stitches made of clear fishing line held her head to her shoulders. The thing in the airlock wasn't trying to get in. It had already been in. It had taken Sarah out there, stitched itself into a mockery of her form, and now it was waiting for me to escape into its mouth. The groan of the hull grew louder, a deafening, manufactured shriek. "Open it, Elias," the thing in the airlock said, its jaw finally unhinging to reveal a row of needle-thin, translucent teeth. Let the warm in. Outside the window, a massive, pale shadow moved behind the real Sarah's body, a limb so long it disappeared into the blackness, mimicking the way I was currently reaching for the lever. Sixth story. The farmhouse smelled of yeast and old wood, but beneath it sat a sharp, chemical tang that made the back of my throat itch. 50 years of marriage. The living room was a sea of flannel and forced laughter, but my eyes kept drifting to my mother, Martha. She stood by the punch bowl, her floral apron tied in a perfect bow. She hadn't blinked once. Not when the steam from the cider hit her face, not when my brother told a joke, not even when a fly landed on the edge of her eyelid. She just stared with a terrifying, static warmth. I walked past the hallway of family photos, stopping at the one from last Christmas. In the picture, Dad was sharp, his grin wide. But Mom, she was a smudge. Her body was clear, but her head was a blur of vibrating pixels, as if she were a frequency trying to tune into our reality. Hungry, Davy. I jumped. She was standing behind me. The sound of her walking hadn't been footsteps, it had been the rhythmic grind crunch of wet gravel being crushed in a silk bag. Just going to get some air, Mom, I lied, my heart thumping against my ribs. Cake first, she whispered. The anniversary cake. She turned and glided toward the kitchen. Her knees didn't seem to bend, she moved like a cardboard cutout being dragged across the floor. I followed, drawn by a sickening curiosity. In the kitchen, she was frosting. She held a palette knife with a grip so tight the wooden handle was splintering. But she wasn't using buttercream. She was scooping thick, gray industrial grease from a rusted canister, smearing the foul-smelling sludge onto a sponge cake. As she worked, she began to hum. It was a lullaby from my childhood, the one about the moon and the willow tree. But the cadence was wrong. She was singing the syllables backward, the vowels sounding like a tape being rewound. Bert Woolley ate Mora. Mom, stop, I choked out. She froze. The palette knife stayed buried in the grease. Slowly, her head began to rotate, further than a human neck allows, until her chin was centered over her spine. The others liked it, she said, her voice a perfect, hollow recording of my mother's pride. Your father had 2 slices. He said it tasted like home. I looked at the floor, my stomach turning to lead. There, tucked under the lip of the refrigerator, was a glint of gold. I knelt and picked it up. It was her wedding ring. But it wasn't loose. It was still encircling a pale, severed finger that looked like it had been chewed off at the knuckle, the bone jagged and dry. I looked up. She was standing in the doorway, blocking the only exit to the living room where my father and siblings were still laughing, their voices sounding thinner and more distant by the second. It's a bit tight, David, she said. She reached for the top button of her floral apron, but she didn't stop there. Her fingers, too long, with nails that looked like yellowed horn, hooked into the skin of her own collarbone. She began to unbutton herself, the flesh parting with a wet, tearing sound like a zipper through raw meat. "Help me out of this," the thing inside my mother whispered. "I want to show you what's really been celebrating with you all night." Seventh story. The fog in the Blackwood Valley didn't just sit, it breathed. It was a thick, cold lungful of spruce needles and damp earth. I wiped the condensation from my goggles, the silence of the forest pressing against my ears like deep-sea pressure. "Focus, Miller," Chief Ben said from somewhere behind me. "The hiker's trail ends near the gorge. Keep your eyes on the brush." I nodded, my boots sinking into the black, sucking mud of the trail. I looked down and saw my own deep, lug-soled prints. Then, I looked back at Ben. He was standing on a patch of fresh silt, but the surface was as smooth as glass. No tread marks. No weight. He brushed against a low-hanging pine limb, but the branch didn't sway, it passed right through his shoulder as if he were made of smoke. I felt a cold lump of lead drop into my stomach. I looked down at the mud and saw it, a cracked GoPro, half buried. "Found something?" Ben's voice asked. It didn't come from behind me. It vibrated inside the center of my forehead, a telepathic broadcast that tasted like copper. I picked up the camera and hit the play button on the cracked screen. The footage was shaky, blue-tinted by the dawn. It showed Chief Ben, the real Ben, screaming as a pale, multi-jointed thing dragged him into a fissure in the rock. The real Ben's face was twisted in a very human, very messy mask of terror. The video cut to black. "Find anything interesting, kid?" I turned. The chief was 10 feet away. His face was a masterpiece of grief, his brow furrowed just the way the real Ben's did when he was worried. But his eyes were dead. They were wide, glassy spheres that didn't adjust to the light, shimmering with a frantic, predatory hunger that no human could fake. My radio, which had been dead for 3 days, suddenly burst into life. It wasn't static. It was the sound of a human heart, thump-shuck, beating so fast it sounded like a drum, accompanied by the wet, rhythmic sound of something being chewed. "You look cold, Miller," the thing said. Its mouth moved, but the words came a half-second later, echoing in my skull. "We should head back to the station. Lock the doors. Stay safe." I didn't answer. I ran. I scrambled through the thorns, the branches tearing at my jacket, until the ranger station appeared through the mist. I lunged inside, slammed the heavy oak door, and threw the deadbolt. I collapsed against the wood, gasping for air. I looked out the small reinforced window. The tree line was crowded. A dozen Bens stood there, perfectly still. Some were wearing his summer uniform, some his winter parka. All of them had that same wide, unblinking stare. They weren't trying to break in. They were just waiting. The heat in the station was cranked to 80, but I couldn't feel it. I looked down at my hands to check for frostbite. My skin was pale, a sickly, translucent white. It didn't fit right. It was bunching up around my wrists like an oversized sweater, the fabric of my own flesh sagging toward the floor. I tried to ball my fist, but the fingers felt too long, the knuckles clicking like dry kindling. I realized then why the bends weren't moving. They weren't waiting to catch me. They were waiting for me to finish the change. I reached for the radio on the desk. Before I even touched it, I heard my own heart start to beat through the speakers. Thump shuck. Thump shuck. 8th story. The blue light of my smartphone felt like a cold needle in my eyes. I was standing in my dark kitchen, the only sound the hum of the high-end refrigerator, when the notification popped up at Chloe Cloud is live, night routine and tea talk. My heart did a slow, nauseating roll. I was at Chloe Cloud. And I was standing in the dark, clutching a cold glass of water. I tapped the notification. The video loaded instantly. There I was, sitting at my vanity in the bedroom just down the hall. The me on the screen looked radiant, too radiant. My skin had a strange, shimmering quality, slightly pixelated at the edges as if my physical form was struggling to render at 1080p. I've been feeling so acidic lately, the thing said. It used my voice, but the cadence was rhythmic and mechanical, like a text-to-speech program trying to simulate emotion. It reached for a bowl on the vanity. It wasn't tea. It was a pile of thick-skinned, unpeeled lemons. The creature picked one up and bit into it. A sickening, dry crunch echoed through my phone speakers, the sound of teeth snapping through something much harder than fruit. Yellow juice sprayed the mirror, but the thing didn't flinch. It didn't even wince at the sourness. "OMG Chloe, you're so real for this," a comment scrolled by. "Love the new energy." A wave of heat hit me, but it wasn't the air conditioning. It was the smell. The hallway suddenly reeked of an electrical fire, burning plastic and ozone, underlaid with the cloying, stagnant scent of a mothballed attic. "Aura, turn on the hallway lights," I whispered, my voice shaking. Identity not recognized, the smart home's pleasant, feminine voice chirped from the walls. "Aura, it's me. Chloe. Unlock the bedroom door." The bedroom door at the end of the hall remained shut. From behind it, I heard a low, guttural whisper that didn't sound like me at all. It sounded like air escaping a punctured tire. "Aura," the whisper said. "Dim the lights. Lock the perimeter." The apartment plunged into total darkness. The heavy magnetic deadbolts on the front door engaged with a series of final, heavy thuds. I was trapped. Panic took over. I grabbed a heavy decorative vase from the console table and sprinted down the hall. I threw my shoulder into the bedroom door, expecting a struggle, but it swung open effortlessly. The room was empty. The vanity was clean. No lemons. No smell of ozone. The ring light was cold to the touch. I stood in the center of the quiet room, my chest heaving, looking at my phone screen. The live feed was still running. On the screen, me at the vanity stood up and looked toward the bedroom door. "Oh," the creature said to the camera, a wide, unblinking grin stretching its face until the skin around its mouth began to tear like wet paper. "She's here early." I watched the screen in horror as, on the video, the bedroom door swung open. I saw myself burst into the room on the phone, holding the vase, looking frantic, standing exactly where I was standing right now. But on the screen, the creature wasn't at the vanity anymore. It was crouched on the ceiling, directly above the doorway, its limbs elongated and twitching like a spider's. I looked at the timestamp on the bottom of the feed. It was 5 minutes ahead. I looked up. A drop of thick, gray industrial fluid fell from the ceiling and landed on my phone screen, right over the face of the girl who was about to die. 9th story. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed with a headache-inducing buzz, casting flat, clinical shadows across the rubber floor of Iron Haven. It was 3:12 a.m. I was alone, the only sound the rhythmic whir snap of the rowing machine. I focused on the mirror wall. The reflection showed me, black tank top, gray joggers, sweat-dampened hair. I pulled the handle to my chest, leaned back, and exhaled. Then I stopped, leaning forward to wipe my brow. My reflection didn't stop. In the glass, the other Julian continued to row. Its movements were a blur of violent, impossible speed, the machine's chain making no sound at all in the mirror world. While my own chest heaved for air, the thing in the glass was perfectly still, no breath, no sweat, no strain. It finished the set a full 10 seconds after I had stopped, then turned its head to look at me. Its neck didn't turn, it slid, the skin twisting like a wet rag being wrung out. I stood up, my legs feeling like jelly. I walked toward the glass, my hand trembling. I pressed my palm against the mirror. The thing mirrored the movement, its hand meeting mine. But where my breath should have fogged the glass, the surface stayed crystal clear. In fact, the mirror felt sub-zero, as if the creature on the other side were a heat sink, drinking the warmth from my skin. I backed away, tripping over a 45-pound plate. The edge sliced deep into my palm. "Damn it," I hissed, clutching the wound. In the mirror, the creature looked at its own uninjured hand. It tilted its head with a wet click. Then, it hooked its fingernails into the crease of its wrist and began to peel. There was no blood. No muscle. As the skin pulled back, it revealed a hollow, obsidian-black cavity lined with rows of tiny, needle-like teeth that were vibrating in anticipation. I didn't wait to see more. I bolted for the locker room, the sound of my own frantic footsteps echoing off the empty walls. The locker room was thick with steam. One of the showers was running, the hiss of the water sounding like white noise. I fumbled for my locker, my hands shaking so hard I could barely spin the dial. "Julian," a voice called out from the shower stall. It was my voice. Exactly my voice, but stripped of all the jagged edges of fear. It sounded calm. Polished. I froze, looking at the bottom of the stall. I saw a pair of feet, my feet, down to the small scar on the left big toe. But the water hitting the floor wasn't clear. It was a thick, grayish industrial fluid that smelled like ozone and old meat. "Don't worry, Julian," the voice said from behind the curtain. "The scan is almost complete. We're just working on a better version of you. The old one was too fragile. Too much leaking. Too much pain." The shower curtain pulled back. I didn't see a face. I saw a mass of wet, rearranging muscle that was still trying to stitch itself into my likeness, the skin flapping like a loose shroud. "Stay still," my own voice commanded, echoing from the creature's chest. "This is just an upgrade." 10th story. The neon sign for Mama's Oasis flickered with a rhythmic buzz snap, casting a rhythmic violet light over the cracked asphalt of the Mojave. Elias killed the engine of his rig. He needed caffeine and grease to survive the final 400 miles. Inside, the diner was a time capsule of chrome and cracked vinyl. The jukebox was playing something that sounded like Elvis, but as Elias listened, his skin began to crawl. The melody was right, but the words were a soup of phonetic gibberish, a hunka hunka burning glarg, zigzie luwanoo, sung with a cheerful, artificial vibrato. A waitress appeared from the kitchen. Her name tag read Mabel. She didn't walk, she drifted. Her legs remained stiff and locked under her pink polyester skirt, her body gliding across the linoleum as if she were being pulled by an invisible wire. "Coffee, sugar?" she asked. Her uniform was held together by dozens of silver safety pins. Elias's stomach did a slow turn when he realized the pins weren't catching the fabric, they were pierced directly through her pale, bloodless skin, stitching the clothes to her torso. Under the harsh, humming fluorescent lights, Elias noticed something impossible. He had a shadow, but Mabel didn't. She was a bright, physical absence on the floor. "Yeah. Black," Elias muttered, staring at the counter. Mabel tipped the glass pot. He watched in frozen silence as the dark liquid poured out. She hadn't put a cup down yet. The stream of coffee hit the air where the cup should have been, but it didn't splash. It didn't fall. The liquid simply vanished into a localized distortion in the air, only to reappear a second later inside a mug that suddenly materialized in her hand. "Here's your steak, honey," she chirped. She slid a plate in front of him. The meat was a grayish-purple, raw and visibly twitching on the porcelain. A soft, rhythmic thump-thump came from the center of the cut. "I asked for medium well," Elias whispered, his heart hammering against his ribs. "It's exactly how you like it," Mabel insisted. She leaned over the counter, her face inches from his. Her customer service smile was so wide it began to crack the dry skin at the corners of her mouth, revealing a glimpse of wet, black muscle beneath. She began to clean the counter next to his plate. Her mouth opened, and a translucent, ribbon-like tongue, at least 3 feet long, flicked out. It slathered across the formica with a wet, vacuum-like sound, tasting the air near Elias's neck. Elias's gaze darted to the window, looking for any excuse to bolt. Outside, his Peterbilt was idling in the lot. Through the windshield of the truck, he saw a silhouette. Another Mabel. She was sitting in his driver's seat, her hands gripped perfectly at 10 and 2. She was staring through the diner window, her unblinking eyes locked onto his. The Mabel in the diner leaned in closer, her breath smelling of old copper and ozone. She didn't use the waitress's voice anymore. She spoke with the soft, trembling lilt of Elias's mother, a woman who had been buried in Ohio 3 years ago. "You looked so tired, honey," the thing whispered into his ear. "I thought I'd take the next shift for you. Forever." The jukebox skipped. Zigsi Luanoo. The Mabel in the truck turned the key. His rig began to pull away into the desert, taking his life with it.